Yeah, hello and welcome to a new episode of our weekly Spielworxx chat season 2. My name is Uli Blennemann, but I'm having a guest today, designer Vez Arponen. Vez, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm fine, thank you. But it's much more important that the guest is in good form because you need to do most of the talking today. So I have my usual easy job here. And there is already Matze in the chat. Good to see you here. Before we start with the wonderful Wes, let me mention just one item of Spielworxx news. Matt Wolf's Squaring Circleville game will be at Kickstarter and Spieleschmiede on the 3rd of June. So 3rd of June, Kickstarter, Spieleschmiede, Squaring Circleville. Mark that date, please, in your calendar. But now back to Vas. Please tell us something about yourself and your background, please.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Vez, and I'm a game designer. My first design was published about 6 months ago by the American company GMT Games, and this the game is called All Bridges Burning. It's on the Finnish Civil War, 1917-1918, so a historical simulation game. Yeah, that's my board game. Me and in real life, so to speak, I work in the academic trade. I'm a researcher at the University of Kiel here in Germany
Mhm.
as well. So that's about me, I guess.
Yeah, wonderful. And hello, Matt. Hello, Nick. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat window. We may even respond. Although let's see. So, Vas, you are from Finland. So there is a lot of forest. There are lots of mooses, and it's always dark, right? So this is a totally 100% correct description, or isn't it?
It is almost correct, except that it's dark most of the time, except in the summer, it's actually very bright. So, Finland is, if anyone knows where Finland is, it's in the very northern parts of Europe. And of course, in the summer, we get a lot of sun when the sun is tilted that way, to the globe. And then in the winter, it is indeed very dark. And yeah, moose, of course, and a lot of forest. I mean, Uli, living here in Germany and being here on the road, you see a few trees here and there. But if you go and take a holiday in Finland, you will certainly get the impression that we are here in the forest, and we are very much. When you leave the towns, then you are deep in the green. That is indeed the wonderful thing about Finland.
Hmm. So are you from the rural areas, or are you from a city? Are you from Helsinki, Tampere, or from any other city?
I'm from northern Finland, so I come from a small town, about 20-30,000 people, but it's up there in the north, very few towns and so on. But so yeah, I come from a town, as it were, so I would consider myself, I guess, an urban,
Hmm.
urban child.
Hmm. There are already some comments here in the chat. And hello, Steve, by the way. But Alex is saying, I took my daughter to meet Father Christmas in Finland when she was 5. I went out a skeptic and came back a believer. So you see, I never made it to Finland. Probably I should do the same. My wife actually, she said, let's go to Scandinavia and visit all the countries. So far we didn't make it. But in your area, did you have, as a kid, as a teenager, did you have a local gaming group to play games, or how did you start gaming?
No, I actually discovered board games very or relatively late, or much later on, rather that way. It's only been about 10 years or so that I've been gaming. So my childhood I spent mostly playing a little bit of computer games, but then also just doing a lot of sports. I was a football, an avid football player, ice hockey player. Up there we have, Uli, I know you are ice hockey fan, and Finland, of course, breathes ice hockey.
Yes.
And so, winters before the climate change has actually changed the conditions. But back in the day, we had really good winters starting in November and all the way
Mm,
until April. Also, we could skate, and we played a lot of ice hockey all winter
mm,
long, and then switched to football in the summer. So that's my gaming background,
mm,
so to speak.
mm,
But it was then, yeah, much later on in Germany, actually. I suppose it was my wife who introduced me to German style board games. We
mm,
have all the classics like St. Petersburg and
mm.
Puerto Rico and a couple of Catan, of course, we have, or she had in her shelf, and I sort of, yeah, got into gaming that way.
Hmm. But what made you then interested into historical games and especially into coin games? Because from standard Euro type games like St. Petersburg till coin, it's still a windy road. Hmm?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it might have had something to do with where I was going in terms of my studies. So, I was always interested in history, and then went on to study philosophy. And philosophy is about understanding, yeah, systems, trying to think systematically about how humans think, how humans act, and therefore also about how humans produce history, so to speak. How does according to which principles, so to speak, our history unfolds, if we take a grand view like that. And yeah, I think the interest really came from that direction,
Hmm.
trying to understand how these things work. And of course, historical simulations are a perfect way to, yeah, study and lay out those
Hmm.
processes in the game, in a gameable form. And we have a long history by now, of course, of strategic gaming, not only in the hobby sense, but also in military and other such analysis fields of analysis. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's how I think I came from, games like Catan, and yeah, even computer games like the Civilization series, into then trying to, or wanting to design games of my own, and trying to bring those ideas out and those understandings of
Hmm.
how a given historical period might have worked, what were the key interactions, that try to bring that onto the table.
Hmm. And then you made another step, as you said, designing a game. So you designed, and you mentioned this game before, the coin game, All Bridges Burning, Red Revolt and White Guard in Finland, 1917, 1918. One thing already, it is the game with probably one of the longest titles. So this is interesting, but what made you interested in that topic? It's a very Finnish topic, of course, but still. And let me briefly post the URL here, the BGG, so that people can follow this. And what made you interested in this one?
Yeah, so of course, as a Finnish person myself, I was interested in our history, and that's really sort of the personal background there played a role. I mean, if we think back, like, how was it to grow up in the 1980s, 1990s Finland, in a place like where I come from. And I think, when you think back to that, it was characterized by these political divisions, and these same political divisions
Mm,
are to be found now in this game. And so the political division was between the working class and then sort of the rest. And so, for instance, I mentioned I come from a small town, 20, 30,000 people, and still in the 80s and in the 90s, we had, for instance, in sports, we had always two clubs, one for the working class kids and the other one for the rest.
mm,
And so we kind of lived that political division in some ways, or we saw it in our everyday life in those ways. I'm not even sure if that makes sense to a lot of people who haven't, um, perhaps, seen that sort of the impact of this political division in their lives. And at the same time, so there was that division, and then at the same time, there in Finland, there's always been this strong idea of, being Finnish, Finnishness, this kind of national
mm,
unity in Finnish independence. And these are kind of themes that I think every Finn kind of grows up with. And in my case, I then wanted to put these sort of games and tell really the formation story of that situation in Finland. So that's how the kind of the historical situation came about. And a related aspect here is that in Finland, you might sometimes, and also internationally, I guess you sometimes talk about the so-called miracle of the Winter War. So this was
Yeah.
then later in history, 1939, as the Second World War was about to, or was starting, and Finland was subject to invasion by Soviet Russia. And a small country, nobody really thought, no chance. There's a big bear from the east coming, and still Finland was able to repulse that initial attack and force even no, not force is maybe a strong word, but basically negotiate a peace settlement without losing that independence. So that kind of, on one hand, this political division, and then on the other hand, this national unity, and national unity even so strong that following this civil war of 1917, only 20 years after that, Finland is able to come together and fight off this much more powerful enemy. So that's really a story that I think is interesting for me as a Finnish person to try to understand, like, how did that come about? And then on the other hand, I think it's interesting for people in general, outside of Finland as well. Like, it's almost like a fairy tale, a small nation overcoming its troubles and disunity and fighting back. So yeah, it's really that type of story that I think I wanted to tell, and try to, in the process, also understand myself, like, where does this come from?
Very interesting, and thank you for explaining this in the context of Finland and even modern day Finland, so that it is a part of national pride and it's still in a way present, surely not in daily life, but very interesting, very
Yeah,
interesting.
it's nationalism is, of course, as a word, it has got very ugly connotations, and I think in the Finnish context, you have to see that Finland was, until 1918, 1917, never an independent nation, always part of either Sweden or Russia. And at the same time, Finns had their own, and like we do today, have our language that is very different from either Swedish or Russian. The Finnish language belongs in a language family that is completely unrelated to Russian and to Sweden. So there was always that, I guess, from the language, coming from the language originally, this idea that we are different from these neighbors that we still are somehow a province of, and so yeah, there's that background to this kind of, in some ways, national feeling in Finland, and these developments, of course, then came to some sort of climax in the period that Albrecht's burning deals with. So we are going back to 1917, which is, at that time, Finland is not yet an independent nation, but a province of Russia. And Russia itself is, of course, at that moment sliding into revolutions and so on, and into civil war later on. So this is perceived in Finland as an opportunity to break free finally and declare independence, which indeed happened 1917 in December. And only about 4 weeks later, there's a civil war in the country, because of a power vacuum that is born when the Soviets, the Russians move out, and there's a power vacuum in Finland. And so, on the one hand, the working class, and on the other hand, the bourgeoisie are coming into this power vacuum, trying to fill it from their political perspective, and so the civil war gets going. Yes.
Very, very interesting, and thank you very much for explaining to this. I hadn't thought about this in detail, but it's really interesting. Getting more to the game mechanics. So we know, or people who know coin, that coin is basically a system for four players. And of course, there's Colonial Twilight for just 2 players. But was it a challenge to design a 3-player coin game, or did you think, well, let's give it a try, and then it simply came together easily?
Yeah, I don't know if easily, but it was very much kind of a process in a funny way of seeing the system sort of build itself in some ways. So you have some in the coin frame. You already have some mechanics with which you work. You have piece types, and maybe you have the active and the inactive status. You have all that sort of language to in which in terms of which to articulate the game mechanics. But then there was indeed the sequence of play for three instead of four factions. And I don't really remember, to be honest, how that history of it was, but sort of, really starting to sort of just try out what works. And like you will know yourself, game design is this kind of building a spider web with your own fingers. You move one thing and then everything else moves with it a little bit as well. And so it's a matter of trying a little bit here and there. And so I think the 3-player sequence of plays is one of the things that I'm most proud of in this design, because I think it really surprised me how well I think it works, and in the kind of, and it stands in certain interesting relationships to the 4-player system. So I think one thing people might notice when they play Overwatch is Burning is that it's quite a lot faster to play. So in this, for those who know the coin system, there's a distinction between full operations and limited operations. Limited operations always acting in one space, whereas a full operation is in multiple spaces. And of course, if you act in multiple spaces, it takes time. Whereas in the 3-player sequence of play, you actually end up acting a lot in terms of limited commands, so that the pace of the game is a lot faster. So that was something that I noticed at some point that the system was bringing into the game, into the coin series, and I was really happy about that. That was one thing. The second thing is that, and it kind of relates to this, there's a lot less downtime. So people
Very
are
good.
doing these quick actions, and in contrast to the 4-player sequence of play, on every card, as people might know in the coin series, there's a card revealed, and that essentially marks one turn or one round of play in the game, and then a new card is revealed. And so for each card, every player gets to play as well. So there's relatively speaking less downtime for each player, which I think also feels quite good in the coin context. And those are really the kind of things that I would probably highlight about that. And and as I mentioned, I think I have the feeling that the system sort of developed itself once you have some ideas about actions and so on, and you start trying out things, and then you see, oh, this works, and this is what it produces. It produces a lot of the same dynamics that we know from the 4-player coin sequence of play, such as that you can block the other player from taking the event, or you can block the other player from this or that. So a lot of those things are still in there, but sort of in a format where the speed of play is greater, I think, and less downtime. So yeah,
Very
I was
good.
really happy to see that come together.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really amazing. But are you currently working on another coin game, or did you say, well, I've now made my one statement in the coin series done? So what are you planning there?
Yeah, I don't. I think I'm done with the coin series as a designer. I mean, the series has grown, of course, quite big, and it has already also now, as I've learned from the GMT updates, it has offshoots in terms of other series. And so I think that space is being explored by a lot of people at this moment, and so I have left my footnote into that series, and I think it's time to move on. And it's I mean, we are all doing this game design, as hobbies. Very few people, of course, make this for a living. And so it's interesting to sort of go into new things and try out new mechanics and tell different stories and that kind of stuff. So that's how I think about it. Yes.
Yeah, makes total sense. And people just check out All Bridges Burning. So, and as Matt is saying in the chat, he's saying the longer the title, the better the game. Absolutely true here. So, wonderful game. So, please check it out. But I want to move to something different here now, Vez. And we talked a little bit earlier before the start of the episode, and I found it totally fascinating. So, first, in your real life, as you mentioned, you are a researcher at the University of Kiel, northern Germany. But you are having or you are thinking about a new project. Can you please tell us more about it?
Yeah, so yeah, in my real life job, I indeed work with archaeologists. I'm not an archaeologist myself, but I work with them. And so when it occurred to me that games they are coming into teaching also in the academic world now gradually. So far, as far as I know, there are some study programs on game design, but in teaching, it's really individuals, enthusiastic individuals who sort of bring games into teaching, bring games into research, and I have quite a lot of interest in being part of that, trying to bring games into research, bring games into teaching, and so and I figured, yeah, I work with a bunch of archaeologists who know a lot, obviously, about what happened in the past, and of course, in board gaming and in digital gaming as well. These kind of topics are rather interesting. We think about, again, civilization games. We think about this kind of 4X games that are about building up your civilization or nation, whatever it is, and so there's that sort of background to this, and I'm totally, like most other gamers, totally interested in this kind of civilization games. And at the same time, it seems like when you know something about contemporary anthropology or the history of anthropology and how human societies work anthropologically, then many of these games might leave something to be desired, or I feel like there's a space there and there are concepts there that have not necessarily been explored. And so from these ideas, yeah, I've been sort of thinking maybe try to combine the real life and then the life on the board, and try to maybe get my colleagues in archaeology to work on a game. And I think something like the Neolithic Bronze Age transition for our part of the world, our archaeologists naturally work in these parts, might be an interesting topic. It offers a lot of sort of key transitions in human history. So, for instance, the Neolithic period is of course the period where humans are transitioning from hunting and gathering based forms of life into agricultural based forms of life, and this has huge implications in terms of just how you live life, but also the forms of social organization, the form of leadership, what power looks like in a society. We get first hierarchies, we get first stratified societies. So, and having access to this kind of a pool of scientists who know a lot about these processes is, I think, a too good an opportunity to not
Yeah.
get bored with.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Mm.
sorry. Go
No,
on.
no, no. Everything. Sorry for interrupting. This is really fascinating. So first, I'm shocked because you're saying or you're hinting that my copy of Advanced Civilization is not totally realistic, that I'm building my army and I'm getting stronger and then I threaten other neighbors and I try to conquer. So there's more. So I'm a little bit shocked here. all these four X games. But I think it's really important that there are games out there who try to show, without of course a 100 pages rules booklet, that there is more between more happening. So how do you want to approach this, especially without getting too complex so that a game is basically unplayable?
Mm. Yeah, that is especially if it's going to be used in teaching and used to convey sort of research results and so on, it has to be relatively speaking simple, but that doesn't mean that it could not have depth. But yeah, it's going to be a design challenge. But I mean, when we think about games on topics such as this kind of civilization building vaguely, then we have strong traditions. That we have the 4X tradition, which casts the sort of the past and also, of course, the future exploration of space in terms of exploration and then the exploitation of the resources. And we have, of course, in board gaming already for some time now the debate about colonialism in games and so on. So this is in some ways coming right into that discussion. And so the past human relationship, for instance, to the environment is in these games often cast in sort of what I would describe maybe as transactional terms. So we have in the game we have some type of resources, usually some sort of natural resources that we as gamers gather and exploit and make use of to then get something else out of it. And this is actually a fairly in the long span of historical development of the human relationship to nature, fairly new concept. So this exploitative, this transactional relationship to nature. If we look at environmental history, there's a lot of talk about how the pre-modern, prehistoric human relationship to nature was rather more about symbiosis, also about seeing magical elements in nature and that sort of thing. So that's one thing that I think could possibly be explored here. The other thing is, as you alluded to, the violence aspect. So, for instance, war. Archaeologically, at least in this part of the world, I mean, Central and Northern Europe, we are not seeing war until Bronze Age. And in archaeology, it's always a little bit of a question of the availability of data and what do we know, what do we have of the past anyway. But we are really seeing the first fights and sort of mass battles and that kind of things a bit later on in the Bronze, in the direction of Bronze Age, and and the kind of relationship again, on one hand, that games tell about the human relationship to nature, that same relationship seems to be also told of the human relationship to each other. So the social, cultural, political relationships are often cast in terms of, as you said, in terms of threat. In my game, in our civilization games, we build our militaries with which we perhaps attack, or even if we don't attack, we at least threaten the other one. We're gonna come and take your land and your resources. And again, until it was possible to exercise monopolies of violence, it was not really plausible, I think, anthropologically speaking. It was not plausible to speak of that type of exercise of military or other physical power or threat. So again, these kind of themes are something that I think the games as we have them perhaps distort a little bit. So there's a lot of possibility there to explore different types of leadership structures, egalitarian versus hierarchical, for instance. That sort of themes come straight out of anthropological and archaeological research, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what can be milked out of these themes in terms of game mechanics and.
I'm already thinking about this right now. I think it's totally fascinating. And Matt here in the chat is also saying, sounds like a fascinating approach to designing about a game about this subject matter. One thing that I'm curious about is So we all have pictures in our head. So stupid Uli, I've read some books. I've seen movies about these ancient times. I've played these games, as I just mentioned. I've played Advanced Civilization. So all of this is pop culture. And I have my view. I know, of course, I know what happened at that time. This can't be wrong. And now you try to have something more, a different picture. So while I think this is absolutely necessary, absolutely fascinating, don't you think there is a real problem there to present it, to have something that is not seen normally with gamers?
Mm. Well, I don't know. I think times they are changing. People I think uh, grow up in a different world than that people in the I don't know early 20th century, for instance, where the first anthropological theories about the human relationship to this and that come from. If you look at the history of anthropology and even philosophical sociological thought, there's been a constant shift, and we are coming to develop different ways of looking at the world. And I think, interestingly, something like coin series. I mean, if you think about the coin series as something that represents a certain philosophy or certain view of what war is like in certain contexts, this represents actually a fairly significant development of the kind of concept of military conflict that we were used to for a long time. And I know you've had people like Volko Ruhnke and living legends, Volko, I mean, it has to be said, living legends, and Mark Herman, who have been themselves living sort of this double life in as this view of military conflict has been changing. So what I mean is, Mark Herman is a game designer, but in his real life, he's been working, as he told in your interview, he's been working in wargaming for, I might get this wrong, but maybe the State Department, somewhere there
For the
in the
Pentagon, for companies, yes.
yeah. So he's been doing that sort of real military side of it, and then he's been one foot having in the hobby gaming and in the war gaming, and so I think looking at this history, how the concept of military conflict has been changing even in the course of career of someone like Mark Herman, it's quite striking. We start with hex and counter games, and then come this kind of formative experience, such as the Vietnam War. I think was a really formative situation, where for the first time it came out. I don't know if for the first time, but painfully, at least for the American audience, it came out that this so-called kinetic, this hard military hardware-based exercise of power, this is unable to win these conflicts, because these conflicts occur also in the political and the hearts and minds dimension. So, and this is where I think, I mean, I don't know. This is my sort of hypothesis that needs to be confirmed with Mark Herman, I think. But I'm wondering if this concept of this experience of Vietnam is kind of in some way standing behind the developments of the conflict simulation gaming, counterinsurgency gaming, certainly, but also the card-driven genre in gaming, because after all, it's Mark Herman who, in his 1993 game around the time of the ongoing Iraq conflict, is coming out with the card-driven game, and he's coming up with the political control concept in We the People. But the point is, our concept of military conflict has been changing, and we've seen it. We can see it with our own eyes, how we transition from hex and counter to something like coin games and the concept of military conflict in those. And so I think the same is happening with games on civilization building games, civilization building themes, 4X themes, colonization colonialism themes. This is all happening right now. We are here to sort of
Yeah.
um, recreate a different version of those
Yeah.
stories. And I think there will, like we see with coin series, there's an audience that
Yeah.
is receptive to these new concepts, or modified concept of what the human relationship to nature looks like, or what military conflict really looks like. So I'm not sure that it's going to be all that difficult. The difficulty is, I think, in the design challenge. Bring those dynamics and those theories and ideas onto the board in a way that is approachable. That is certainly a challenge. But I'm a firm believer that the audience for it is there
Yeah,
already.
I really hope so. And as you said, I think times are changing, and you see more and more different approaches. And this linear view, it was this, and now this is, and it will be this, is changing finally, and it's long overdue. So I agree here. And there is another mentioning, I think this is even from Munich, Germany, I'm not that sure. Very interesting. It's a focus on developing mechanics that reflect the dominant theory of the academic field, or this is about providing a sandbox to explore competing theories. So, how you see this, Vez?
I guess design is all game design is always a little bit of both. I mean, it's not a very exciting answer, but I guess that's the reality of it. I mean, and in the end, even if you have a sandbox game, you are, as a designer, you are putting some structures in place. You are putting some elements into the sandbox, and you are uh, you are positing certain relationship between those elements, certain dynamics. So in that sense, even a sandbox game is a structured
Yeah.
system.
Mhm.
Um, I think what is actually meant by sandbox, if we are strictly speaking, using the term in a strict sense, might be just that it doesn't railroad the design
Mhm.
according to the historical pathways, but gives flexibility there. But it's a structured system all the same. So yeah, that would be my reaction to that.
Mhm. And yeah, I really hope that you are able to spend a lot of time with your colleagues on this. This is maybe for fall, late fall, right? Or have you already started working
No,
on
we
it?
haven't yet started. I mean, it's a little bit of the world is in flux now with the pandemic and all that, and I think everyone has got quite a lot of online meetings already to push another one into that that mix is perhaps. But yeah, it's coming. We are waiting for some confirmation also about whether there's some interest in funding that type of a project and so on. So think that the overall picture is relatively complicated. It's not only about the Holy Spirit of wanting to do something like this, but it's also sometimes sadly about the practicalities of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hopeful that in one form or another, this type of ideas will find an outlet.
Yeah, hopefully it will. So I'm extremely looking forward to this. I'm extremely curious. So I think it's really fascinating. So looking at the clock, so I think we finished this off. So really, Wes, this was a pleasure, and it made me constantly thinking. And this is always a good sign, in my opinion, at least. And so if people want to reach you, Wes, what's the best way to reach you?
You can drop me a geek mail. So on Board Game Geek, everyone knows who knows anything about gaming knows Board Game Geek and the Geek Mail, and you can find me there. On Twitter, also, just search for Vez Arponen, and you will find my handle there, and yeah, those are probably the easiest ways. And yeah,
So excellent. And next week, and thank you, of course, all for viewing, for watching. And next week will be a regular episode. So with me presenting some Spielworxx and industry news. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask in advance or have a specific topic in mind that you'd like to see discussed, just drop me a mail at uli@spielworxx.de. That is uli@spielworxx.de. And there are some other comments here who say that it was very interesting from board games for me. Very interesting, thanks. So our pleasure. Actually, I didn't do a lot, so it was Vez. And so thanks again. Till next week. Bleibt alle gesund. Black Lives Matter. Bye bye. Bye.
Bye bye.